Hi, I'm Justin Evertson, a certified arborist with the Nebraska Forest Service and the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. And we're here in Wayne Park in Waverly, Nebraska today. And we're going to talk about trees and sustainability and how those two things meld together in our communities in a park like this and then across our community. We're going to take a look at trees and how they tie into our power production and distribution. We're going to talk about trees in a sustainable sense and how they sustain our communities. And we're just going to have fun talking about trees and all the cool things they are and that they do for us. We're going to stop at about 4 or 5 points in the park today, and I hope you'll just come along on this quick little journey we take about trees and sustainability here in Waverly. So come along with me. People sometimes ask me, do trees have superpowers? That's a really good question, and I think generally trees do have superpowers, especially when we think about them collectively. Trees do a lot of good for the community. One of the most important things they do right here in the summer, they cast shade and make our communities much cooler and much more livable. They help us conserve energy in our homes. In the winter, they block winds and they help us reduce the heat load in our community, in our homes and in our communities. And then trees also provide great homes for wildlife. They provide food and lumber. They do a lot of good for us. But yes, some individual trees do have superpowers, and one of the most impressive ones to me is bur oak. Bur oak, this great tree, this native hardwood that grows across the Great Plains, its superpower is that it is resistant to fire. It's a fire-adapted tree. It could survive life on the prairie, which is one of the main reasons it was able to grow here in the Great Plains, competing with fire in the prairie system. And if we look at a branch of a bur oak, we'll see it's very corky and furrowed, and that gave it the ability to withstand that fire. And if we look in the background, there's a wonderful bur oak growing right behind us here in the park. And the bur oak now provides shade, wonderful long-lived shade in our communities. Another great thing about the bur oak is they're long-lived. Do you believe it or not, there's a bur oak growing in Nebraska that's almost 500 years old. So yes, trees do have superpowers, including our wonderful bur oak. All right, Wayne Park is actually an arboretum here in Waverly. We've planted over 300 varieties of trees and shrubs throughout the park. And when we think about where we're going to place those trees and those shrubs, we really need to think about right tree, right place, right plant, right place. You know, trees in our communities often grow in or near power lines and other distribution aspects of our utility infrastructure. So we really need to be careful about where we think we're going to plant these things. Here in the park, at the edge of the property line right here where we're adjacent to homes, we saw that there was a power distribution line right here, and it was very cognizant and aware to us that we need to make sure the trees and the shrubs were pulled back away from that power line. So before you plant anything, look up, look down, be aware of those power lines, and make sure you plant the trees and shrubs in the right place. Lincoln Electric System has always been a big supporter of tree planting in the communities that it's involved in. And even though those things are sometimes in conflict, trees and power distribution, we are all real partners in making these trees grow properly and do right for our communities. We're all in it together, and LES is a great supporter of that. People sometimes ask me, what are the best trees to hug, and is it okay to hug trees? I definitely am pro tree hugging. I'm a tree hugger. We're right by a sugar maple. I love sugar maples. I'm not afraid to hug a sugar maple. A sugar maple is a cool tree. You know, one of the cool things about sugar maple is it gives us syrup. If you like pancakes like I do, maple syrup. So I love to hug a sugar maple. And there are all kinds of other trees that are wonderful to hug. In fact, any tree that is close by and you can get your arms around, give it a hug. You know, the great thing about trees, they might not hug back, but they're not going to bite you. They're not going to yell at you. They're there for you all the time, and I'm sure they appreciate us hugging them from time to time. It might be easier to say what trees we shouldn't hug, and for me, I won't hug trees like a honey locust or a black locust or an Osage orange, because those trees have thorns. And then I also rarely try to hug anything that's an invasive species or overplanted. The ornamental pear is one of those. Russian olive, they're invasive in our area, and so I won't hug those trees. But by and large, a lot of trees we can give a hug to. So don't be afraid to give a tree a hug. Be a tree hugger for a day or two. Here in Wayne Park, as we mentioned, it's a part of an arboretum. And in this arboretum, we are displaying trees and shrubs to help educate the public about all the good that trees do. But we also take a bigger picture approach about this as we lay out our trees and shrubs. We try to think more about sustainability and the broader environment. So we regularly combine our trees and shrubs with other landscape elements, especially ground covers, that add biodiversity to the landscape. So the trees are a part of a landscape element that are just one component of sustainability in the long run. When we combine it with other things and we maintain those things together as kind of its own little ecosystem, we invite much more biodiversity, including bird and mammal life, but especially insects and microorganisms that help feed those upper animals in the chain of life. And so it can all be done in a community park or in an arboretum where we're striving at sustainability. When we do this wisely, our trees are doing the benefits of capturing stormwater, providing shade and comfort, adding beauty to the park and to the community, and then they're also great homes for wildlife. When we think about it collectively across the community and the sustainability that trees and the landscape provide, they really do make our communities much more sustainable and livable. So go plant trees, plant them with other like-minded plants where they like to duke it out, and they invite all kinds of other creatures to the party to have fun and be a part of it. It really is a sustainable effort here in Waverly and Wayne Park. Now I'm glad that I'm a human, but if I was a tree and I had to pick a tree that I would be, I'd probably pick this tree. This is a pecan, a northern pecan they call that. It's not actually native, technically, to Nebraska, but it's native not far away, just across the river in Missouri, so it's almost native. The pecan is related to the walnuts and our other nut trees like hickories, and it's a really wonderful tree that we should use more of in our communities. It's long-lived, it's fast-growing, it'll grow straight and true if you follow this trunk up. Wow, this one, believe it or not, is only 15 years old, and it's already over 40 feet tall. A pecan is long-lived, it's beautiful, it does a lot of great good for wildlife and biodiversity. But I gotta tell you, the reason I would want to be a pecan is because I love pecans. I love to eat pecans. I love pecans on a sticky bun, and I especially like pecan pie. That's probably the biggest reason I'd like to be a pecan. And today pulled a leaf off of this tree here, growing in mid-July here in the park, and we can see that some pecans are already developing, and they're going to be ripe this fall and perfect for picking and eating. The only trouble with pecan is the squirrels and the blue jays also really love pecan, and a pecan in your yard, you'll probably never get the nuts. They're so high, the squirrels and the blue jays will eat them before you get to it. But we have wonderful pecans that grow around Nebraska. The Nebraska Nut Growers Association harvests these pecans growing right here in Nebraska, and we can grow them, we can harvest them, and we can eat pecans right here, grown natively in Nebraska. So, yeah, I love pecan, and I'd probably like to be a pecan in a future life. Boy, it's a beautiful day for a walk through the park today. When we talk about trees, some of the most important trees to plant in our communities are native trees. But what the heck is a native tree? Were there really native trees here in Waverly 150 years ago? You know, we're a prairie state. Nebraska was 97% prairie at the time of settlement. But we did have trees. Trees did grow in the region, and along our creeks and riverways we had quite a few trees. In fact, 20 to 25 species of trees grow across Nebraska that we can plant in our communities to give us shade and wind protection and do other good things. This is one of those native trees that we're standing under today. This is called a linden, an American linden or a basswood. And one of the great things about linden basswood, you can't see it right here, but it was blooming about 2 weeks ago. Wonderfully sweet, fragrant blooms. And they attract all kinds of bees and other pollinators from miles around. When a linden tree is blooming, it is buzzing. You can hear it with all the pollinators flying in and on it. Linden honey is one of the best honeys that you can eat even. So linden trees, one of those great native trees that does multiple purposes by not only providing shade and wind protection and doing all those good things that trees do for us, but our native trees are the most important trees in sustaining biodiversity. In fact, if I show you a native tree, I'll show you a tree that sustains literally dozens, if not hundreds of insects. And those insects, in turn, feed birds and other wildlife. So it's all this big party going on around us. We don't always think about our individual trees doing that, but our native trees are especially important for this. So in Nebraska, we have various things like native oaks, bur oak, red oak, black oak, chinkapin oak. We also have a couple different kinds of maple, silver maple, box elder maple. We have hickories, we have lindens, we have elm, we have hackberry, honey locust, we have coffee tree, and many other species that we can plant in our communities. And then if we think about it just a little more broadly, our native trees are also right adjacent to us in neighboring states, just across the river in Iowa, or just to the south in Kansas and Missouri, or up in the Black Hills of South Dakota, or if we go west, we're looking at Rocky Mountain species across the border in Wyoming and Colorado. Those are all regionally native species, and we should use those regionally native species more often in our communities. They're the ones doing the most good for wildlife sustainability and biodiversity. So yes, we had native trees here, and they're wonderful trees to plant. They're not perfect, but let's add as many to our communities as we can and celebrate them every day in our parks. Our native trees. As we mentioned, Wayne Park is an arboretum, and we have different collections or types of trees in the arboretum. One of the favorite things I've liked to work on is nut trees. And so generally, nut trees can constitute anything that throws out a nut. Things like walnut, butternut, which is a cousin of walnut. We talked about pecan and hickories. And then there's a group of trees we call our buckeyes. Buckeyes are also nut trees. This is a buckeye nut from last year, spent and fell to the ground. And this fall, when they come out of these seed husks, we'll be able to show you how they look like a buck's eye. And that's where it gets its name, buckeye. So this is an Ohio buckeye that we're standing by. It's native to the Midwest, not far from here. Tough, drought tolerant, easy to grow, great fall color, and it produces nuts that the squirrels will eat later in the season. There are cousins of the Ohio buckeye that we're growing in the park. We're growing 4 other types of buckeyes, including what they call Texas buckeye, yellow buckeye, and even the horse chestnut from Europe. Here's an example of our native buckeye. This is our buckeye native in Nebraska. This is called Texas buckeye, and it grows naturally down in the Rouleau Bluffs area in the southern tier of counties. It's a close cousin to that Ohio buckeye. You can't hardly tell them apart, other than the Texas buckeye that we grow is shorter. It's more shrubby. But as we look down the road here, we're going to see 2 or 3 more other species of buckeye, including yellow buckeye, which is a native to the Appalachian region of the U.S. And then further down, even further in our collection, is what we call horse chestnut. Horse chestnut is actually native to Europe and Asia, but it's a beautiful buckeye. It gets these white candelabra flowers that are about 1/2 foot long, and it's wonderful in the spring to look at. So, if you're inclined, there are all kinds of nut trees that you can grow in your yard or your parks or anywhere you want to do it. And our buckeyes are some of the best that we can grow. Here in the park, we definitely emphasize our native trees since they do so much for biodiversity. But there are a lot of non-native trees that we can add to our landscapes and especially our community environment, the community canopy of the forest. And here's one that really does well in eastern Nebraska. That's the ginkgo. Ginkgo biloba, they call it. The scientific name is Biloba referring to the bilobed nature of the leaf. Do you see that there? Nothing else looks like the ginkgo leaf. The ginkgo is a fun tree because it actually dates to the age of dinosaurs. The fossil record shows that the ginkgo was around at the same time as the dinosaur was, and there's even fossilized ginkgo leaves that occur in Nebraska that show Nebraska 40 to 50 million years ago had the ginkgo in it. So ginkgo, a non-native tree, it doesn't do much for biodiversity because nothing eats it. It's disease and insect resistant, which also helps make it live a long time in our landscapes. It's drought tolerant, and it has wonderfully beautiful yellow fall color. Those leaves turn a nice golden yellow, and then they shower off the tree almost overnight after about 2 weeks. So, if you're looking for something unusual and really fun to plant in the landscape, don't be afraid to plant Ginkgo biloba. Speaking of trees not to hug, this is a native honey locust. And the native honey locusts, they're not all thorny, but most of them are pretty thorny. And they're the kind of thorn that would drive right through your chest if you weren't careful. So we don't hug these native honey locusts. We also talked about black locusts. The thorns aren't quite as bad on a black locust. And that's also Osage orange is a thorny tree. But this is the worst offender for thorniness in Nebraska, the honey locust. The trees we plant in our communities now that are honey locusts are actually thornless. They selected varieties of honey locusts that don't have thorns, and we could hug those, but just be careful which honey locust you are hugging. Some will bite back. People sometimes ask me, Justin, what tree should I plant near my house? And I always want to say, well, you know, there's 300 different kinds of trees we can grow here, so what tree do you like? It's not always a simple answer to a question like that, but I tell you, if you're planting trees near your house, trees that are going to give shade over your house, you can't go wrong with oak trees, and there are a lot of oaks that you can try. We have 30 varieties in the park here, but an oak tree that we don't use enough of, that we should plant more of, is our native chinkapin oak. Chinkapin, sometimes called yellow oak. Chinkapin refers to that it looks like a chestnut leaf. The chinkapin oak leaf is reminiscent of a chestnut oak, or chestnut tree, if you ever saw a chestnut leaf. The chinkapin oak is native in Nebraska. It's drought tolerant. It's tough as nails. It'll grow pretty quickly to a nice rounded shape, 40 to 50 feet tall. It's drought tolerant. It's heat tolerant. And it'll tolerate a wide variety of soil pH. So it'll grow from Kimball, Nebraska to Rouleau, Nebraska, all points in between. And what makes the oaks so special around structures and houses and other places is they're so resistant to storm damage. They're strong wooded, they've got good branch structure in the tree, and they won't come apart in storms. So you can actually have a branch growing over your house and feel confident that you're probably not going to have any storm damage landing on your house. Plant an oak tree if you want shade over your deck or near your house, and especially start planting more of something called chinkapin oak, a nice native Nebraska tree. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that quick little tour of Wayne Park here in Waverly, Nebraska. Our park is an arboretum now. We've planted over 300 varieties of trees and shrubs. Something to think about as we wrap up here today is the changing dynamics of our community forests and our landscapes. In my lifetime, 2 really important disease and insect problems have really changed our community forests. Dutch elm disease killed most of our elms in the 60s and 70s, and now emerald ash borer is here, and it's going to start killing most of our green ash trees across Nebraska. And our big old green ash trees, really beautiful, wonderful trees, a lot of them are going to go away in our communities. So keep working at planting a wide variety of stuff, a diversity of stuff. Look at what we've done in the background of this green ash, where we've planted about 8 different species of trees to help take the place of these ash growing in this ravine in the park. We need to think about that in our communities and in our yards. And a great place to start your journey on this is the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. You can spend some time on the website looking at the kinds of trees we recommend. But you can also visit an arboretum in your local community, go see the trees that are labeled, and see what trees make the most sense in your own yard and in your own community. So when we talk about resiliency and sustainability, we need to think about a broader diversity of the trees around us. We can all do this, we're all in it together, and let's start planting a wide variety of trees in our communities. Thank you for your time today.